Story 1. A Jaunt Through the Trees. The sun was still up when we arrived. The car park was more of a passing place. Simmers was shuffling in the passenger seat next to me. He was overheating, dressed in all the latest climbing gear, tin, whistle, and dodgy Japanese head torch from eBay. He had certainly put in considerable financial effort whilst preparing for this his first relatively basic hike. "I'm sure we can't stop here," he said, pointing assuredly to the waterlogged clearing at the side of the tree-lined road. I assured him that we could. I had checked and double-checked for easily 2 miles each way of Utch Forest's main signpost, and this was the car park. It had only taken us 2 hours to get here, but those were 2 long hours. Simmers had originally stated that it would be a 35-mile drive. However, nearly 40 minutes into the journey, he muttered actually 35 miles north of Cathry Rock, then another 40-ish on the B roads. He also insisted the website had mentioned a sizable car park next to an old cattle grid, but there were neither, and I was done with wasting petrol trying to find one. Anyway, we were here now. We alighted, and I grabbed my kit from the boot. Simmers grabbed his backpack. The annoyances from the journey seemed trivial now. I was glad to have a friend with me for once. I was so used to doing everything alone, and whatever David Sim lacked in experience, he made up for in enthusiasm. His interest in my wilderness camping and hiking stories was genuine, and it made me feel wiser than was really justified. He had been talking about doing some proper trips away with me in the coming year, and seemed to be taking a significant interest in the outdoors. As we began to climb along the immediately uphill trail, however, the conversation became physically strained on Simmers' end. He was slim enough and prepared in every other aspect, aside from his fitness level, which was surprisingly low. The fancy vents in his jacket and his high-priced base layer were not compensating for his poor cardio, and I suggested we turn back and he leave. Some unnecessary items in the car. It was forecast to be a stable night with temperatures staying above 8 degrees. And his multiple accessories seemed a hindrance at the time. 10 minutes later, we were back at the car park. We dumped some weight then, set off again, the sun now starting to set and lending an eerily somber tone to the forest. I can't honestly say that I felt something was wrong as we set off that second time. It's a struggle to articulate the change in mood we both felt, but we did both feel it. It was an intuition, almost, but not really. It was maybe just a week in chemistry, not enough to make us turn back, however. Thinking back to being at the foot of that initial uphill trail the second time around, the car 10 meters behind us, it fills me with regret. The sadness I feel when I think about this specific point in time is unwavering. If we had been given an opportunity to save ourselves the sickening horror and ultimate tragedy which was patiently waiting for us within the forest, that was it. The breeze picked up significantly after about 20 minutes, and though it wasn't cold, the atmosphere seemed to be snarling as the increasing wind snapped through the trees, whipping loose straps into our face and onto our skin. Within an hour, perhaps less, the sun seemed to have set. We assumed it was simply the effect of cloud mixed with the large Douglas firs that surrounded us, giving the illusion of a premature sunset, as it was at least 3 hours early. It was around about this time, however, that we made a rash and ill-conceived decision. which was to haunt me for the rest of my life, every night, every morning, and finding a place in every dream. Clearly uncomfortable with my moderate hiking pace and frustrated at the chronic wind, Simmers convinced me it was better that I go on ahead, that he was certain of where to go once the path gave way to a clearing with around a half-mile of 30 to 35% grotty, rocky scramble to the top of the mountain. I initially objected as, although this was by no means a technical route, and even a map and compass were unnecessary, it was still his first proper hike, and it was by no means unheard of for people to go missing on trails half this size due to absence of light, lack of orienteering experience. I have to admit, though, that the walk had been tedious. As for me, and that strange, unrelenting wind was having an odd effect on my temperament. Usually it takes a lot to aggravate me, but I was aware that I was becoming more abrupt with Simmers' day, despite him obviously just trying to improve the mood by talking. "Hurry the fuck up, you out-of-shape piece of shit," I screamed silently through closed mouth and gritted teeth. My mood was becoming more and more hateful, and I mean hateful. When the wind would get particularly strong, I would actually spit these kind of immature and vicious remarks into the air, convinced there was a big enough gap between us that he couldn't hear me. I don't understand, looking back, what it was filled me with such uncharacteristic maliciousness. There were points before we split up that I didn't even feel self-aware. For a while we were just walking, half bent over into the wind. I was just thinking about how I didn't want him to be there. It was him, however, that made his suggestion openly that we should break away. I began to steadily increase my pace, the wind seeming less of an irritation now that I was alone. The negativity which had been building inside me like an F-tone crescendo had now been tempered, and I felt as if something that had once been cloaking me was lifted or had dissolved. It was almost a tangible difference in restraint. The way I felt when ascending was almost comparable with the feelings a beginner might have when imagining climbing Everest. I only experienced the positives. The beauty of the place, the darkness now lent a different, less macabre tone to the shadowed forest and rocks ahead. I had no feelings of fatigue or even of physical exertion, or I was unaware of any such feelings I might have been experiencing. It was almost as if I was being rewarded for leaving my friend behind, although I say this with hindsight, as Simmers' presence or lack thereof never once seeped into my thoughts during this period. This unbecoming feeling of euphoria, despite my close friend's extreme fatigue and my lack of care of his progress, continued as I broke through the trees and commenced a scramble to the top. It was only here that I can recall thinking of my companion, and I thought of him only because I knew he would have trouble with the jagged and unusual, considering the time of year was only late autumn, almost frosty rocks. I am ashamed and find it hard to understand why this realization brought an unnatural smile to my face. This wicked smile stayed with me even when I noticed blood on the rocks and smeared across my palm, and instead of stopping to inspect the wound and wait to warn Simmers of particularly jagged rock edges, I increased my speed tenfold, rushing to the top, the wind screaming, with me pulling myself with blooded hands onto the monstrous, cracked, horizontal rock, signaling the top of the mountain, grunting and trembling like a savage at the end of a bloody fight. Silent. Everything was silent and I was oddly numb. Regret or worrying had not yet started to return to my once fully irrational mind, but gradually I began to become aware of the situation. What was wrong with this scene? What was I thinking leaving Simmers alone and rushing off, unable to hear anything he may have been shouting, not caring, and not even considering to look back, not once? Where had the wind gone? I had been battling it for hours, and now, at the highest point in the climb, there was nothing but an eerie heaviness and strange patches of what looked like frost on tea. Rock surface. From my vantage point at the edge of the towering rock, I established the path with which my friend would most likely ascend, and using my broad view of the trees now far below, I began painfully focusing on anything which looked like it. Maybe a torchlight. I couldn't see him. I sat for what seemed like an hour. Though I had no way of estimating time, I just sat, gradually succumbing to a creeping fear, unable to take any comfort in lying to myself, suggesting he may have just gone back to the car. The biting cold formed the rock seeping into my body. Then I saw it, moving at a furious pace. The head torch was progressing in a rapid, irregular manner. Every now and then it would disappear, only to reveal itself a few seconds later in an impossibly advanced position. My initial relief of seeing Simmers in motion was quickly turning to bewilderment, mixed with the fear that I was going mad, that my eyes were deceiving my logical mind. How could he move like T? Is up such an unforgiving route? He was nowhere near the path we had agreed on taking. Then he broke through the trees. I was half standing, with one leg behind, posed as if to retreat. Though I knew I had nowhere to go, I now had no idea what it was that desperately climbed the rocks only meters below me. I tried to look down clearly, inching forward whilst still poised to run, but as I did, the head torch jolted up, as if to look back at me. Its light blinded me, and I involuntarily spun round. My eyes recovered, and this is when I saw her. She stood at the edge of the rock behind me, a cruel, twisted smile on her white face, long fingernails pushed into her bald head. Like a maniac in ecstasy, she was laughing, but I could now hear nothing save the immense wind which had returned. It was worse than ever. As I lay helpless on the cold rock, I saw that thing which took my sanity forever. Her eyes, reflecting outer darkness, her mouth was open and darkness spewed out. Her body was white, and draped over her nakedness was some crude symbol made from what looked like twisted branches and torn skin. More violently she laughed, and more painful the wind became, gnawing at my skin and taking my breath. Her posture was menacing. She stood on disfigured toes, like a cadaver hoisted up, and moving like a possessed marionette. Though I could hear nothing, I could see her cracked black lips move as she stared at me, her smile mocking my vulnerable body. Then she looked down, as if in some sickening trance. As she did, I saw the light of Simmers' torch. With difficulty I turned to face my friend. Oh God, what had she done to him? His face. That smile, that wretched smile on his face. Story 2. In the bayou. If who want to understand why I left the place I was at, you're really just going to have to hear the entire story. You won't believe it, of course, but your skepticism means nothing, because what I saw that night on the bayou has been with me ever since, in my mind, in my thoughts, and sometimes even in my dreams. It exists as a disturbing memory, that I cannot shake away, that will never go away. Why? Just so long as I live, it will be one of those things so terrifying that it'll still be just as keen in my mind on my deathbed as it was the day it occurred. But whether or not you believe me, I'll tell it to you anyway, if not only to serve as a warning, a plea for caution. If you ever find yourself near the swamps late at night, at the time I was working at a shitty little fast food place. The only thing worse than working at a shitty fast food place is working at a shitty fast food place on the night shift by yourself, without a vehicle, especially when you just so happen to live in the heart of rural Louisiana. Such was my case some years ago, the night this event happened to me. During this time I lived quite a few miles away from the restaurant I worked at, and due to my lack of a vehicle or any access to a public bus system, I was dependent on others for my transportation to and from work. One night, after a busy evening of serving customers, I closed the store and locked up the restaurant. When I phoned for my ride, nobody answered. Nah, I'm not here to throw a pity party, but I can't help but to express anger at the fact that the person who drove me to and fro to work was my roommate, who had a car but no fucking job, and I was basically the only person in our house who paid the rent at this time, and this loser had the carelessness to fall asleep, leaving me with no fucking option but to walk. Again, this was not the first time that this had happened. The first time this had happened, it took me an hour and a half to get home walking briskly, and to those of you who have never been to the rural regions of Louisiana, you have no clue. Here we have what is called a bayou. It's basically swamp, thick, murky, moist, frog-laden, mosquito-swarming, gator-infested, crappy-smelling swamp, with thick tall grass, cattails, cypress trees, and heaves of pond scum, and I just so happened to live on the bayou, all the way down a long dirt road with hardly any street lights and thick swamp on both sides of the road. There are no side roads, and the houses down this street are separated sometimes by more than a quarter-mile apart. It's not merely spooky walking down this road at night. It's fucking terrifying. You hear sounds, both real and imagined, coming from the bayou, chirping, croaking, howling, grunting animals, the rustling of leaves and branches and the canopy of the cypress trees, and the splashing water from underneath them. That's the worst. You can hear the sound of something lurking in. Here be abruptly duck under water. It can be a turtle, a snake, or an alligator. You never know. You just keep walking with your teeth and hands clenched tight, hoping nothing crawls through the tall grass next to you and onto the road, or, even worse than the subtle dunking sounds, the sudden splashes that happen when you're walking and scare a toad or frog, and it jumps into water. The sound makes you almost shit yourself as you begin a running spree that lasts about 3 seconds before you realize what it was. And then you're left with your heart pounding so hot road that the sound of your blood gushing in your temple scares you just as much. These are the types of things that happen when you're in the bayou. This is what I had to look forward to that night, as my asshole roommate slept sprawled out on the sofa with the television set probably tuned into reruns of the Three Stooges and the Marx Brothers. And don't get the impression that I simply called once and gave up. You can trust that his cell had around 7 or so missed calls, 3 very unfriendly voicemails, and several aggressive text messages. I could just imagine his phone laying in another room of the house, softly vibrating in my desperate attempts to reach him as he snored. But eventually I gave up, and having just about no other friends to contact in the area as a recourse, I stopped by the nearby gas station, grabbed an energy drink, and began my ways back home. Now, you must understand, the first 30 or so minutes of my walk isn't that bad. I'm ASTI. Lines in the most populated part of town, and there are street lights, stores, houses, and cars passing by in large numbers. That's important. If there are a lot of cars going by, you feel safer than when there are very few cars going by, because when there are only one or two cars that pass you every 3 minutes, that means that there could be a psychopath in one of those cars, and they may have enough time to stop by and murder you without being caught. But if there are a lot of cars around, there may be psychopaths passing by, but they'll most likely not kill you then, because there are too many people around to witness the crime. At least that's my reasoning. I digress. No psychopaths pulled up next to me as I walked about this part of town. Next, there comes a time in my journey where I have to turn down several suburban neighborhoods and walk some streets to get where I am going. And here's where things get a little less safe, and I have to be a little more cautious. There's less traffic down these roads, and you never know when some punk or gang may be hanging out in some empty lot or house who might mess with you or try to pick a fight or mug you, or just take an empty bottle of malt liquor and bash your skull in, as an initiation ritual or something. These are the thoughts that go through my head as I walk this region, and they keep me on my toes until I reach the point where houses become fewer and the bayou begins. This is where the dirt road leading to my home is, and that's where I found myself this night. On foot, I looked down the narrow road. You can only see so far before it fades into misty darkness. I resented that I would have to spend the next hour walking its distance until I reach home, but anger took hold of Here when I thought about how all of this could be spared if not for the neglect and carelessness of my roommate. When I got home, I was really going to have it in for him. I truly considered that time the possibility of physically smacking his damn face, and with this thought in mind I launched defiantly down the road. And the further I walked, the darker it became, until no light shined but the stars and the sliver of the moon above me. Very soon the sound of any vehicle was completely non-existent. There was just me, the road, and the bayou, and whatever creatures dwelt there. I heard the crickets chirp and the frogs croak and the occasional bird coo. To avoid fear, I focused on their chorus and let their sounds preoccupy my mind. I walked watching my shoes press into the knee dirt as I placed one foot in front of the other. I would count my steps until I reached 100, and then I'd begin again. I tried to lose myself in the repetition. My shoes became damper and damper, and I felt the soles of my feet become moist. I stopped counting to ponder whether I should smack my roommate with a wet sock, but my thought was interrupted when I glanced up for a moment and saw that I was not alone on this road. A sharp panic seized my heart, and I became very nervous. A long distance up ahead of me I could discern the soft silhouette of a figure. It was so far away that I couldn't tell whether it was moving ahead or in my direction. I froze, and I could feel the blood gushing in my temples. What were the chances of there being some malicious P.U. neck wandering this street at night looking to rob me or take a fight? This was the reassuring thought I had as I tried to convince myself that I was safe. I tried to keep calm, to not let my nerves get the best of me. Whoever this was probably just as frightened of the prospects of me as I was of them. If they had already detected me, that is, I didn't know what to do. Run. There was only two directions. Continue walking. What were the risks? As I stood there, I saw that the figure was indeed moving in my direction, and its form was becoming more defined, and this was the time I began to notice how awkward it was. Moving, the figure didn't walk normal. It didn't bob up and down, like how a normal person looks like as they walk. What was coming towards me, it would seem from my perspective, moved in short, quick, jerking movements, and I could see from what light 'twas present how its twitchy limbs projected from its torso, and how it was getting close, and how its head stuck out from a neck that was longer than any human neck should be, and how at this time I could now faintly hear the noises that it seemed to make, the sound of suckling, and how it was moving quicker, and how its face lifted, and I could see its eyes glare like glowing yellow beads, and how these wide beady eyes locked onto mine, staring at me and how it stopped, and how we both were there, motionless, yards away, looking at each other, and how it then let out the most ungodly, inhuman screech I have ever heard. Like a pig being gutted, it squealed, violin, tly, and the sound resounded through the bayou, and the chirping and croaking of crickets and frogs stopped. Everything stopped. And the rumbling and humming was all that could be heard afterwards. The rumbling and humming of a motor ahead, a vehicle speeding towards us, tires racing loudly. The thing in front of me hunched over and turned to see the headlights beaming our way. It hissed, getting down on all fours, only pausing for a moment to turn back towards me, gawking at me with its wide eyes, before crawling hastily into the swamp, the vehicle that scared the thing a wall. Why was my roommate's car? He never saw it, whatever it was, and I never wanted to see it again. I moved as soon as I could, and haven't been there since. Story 3. 0 Istanbul, L. Turkey, August 9 hours, 12 minutes, and 9 seconds a.m. I am at a small outdoor cafe just a few hundred yards from the teeming throng of a morning market, just in sight of the Bosporus. I love this city and all its thick and violent contradictions. The rising heat of the day is already causing the linen of my suit to cling to my legs. I awoke last night with a change of heart. You are owed an explanation, and even a warning. If I do as I have planned, I and my actions will be vilified and misunderstood. Please believe me. I am doing this for all the right reasons. You may not see it now, but in 10 or 20 years you will see a new world born that is worth any sacrifice. I have done my work here in Turkey, the first of many great cities to see, and I board a plane tomorrow. Don't bother looking. For me here, Samarkand, Uzbekistan, September 5:04, 20 a.m. I am in one of the oldest settlements of mankind, and Her Majesty overwhelms me just as her descent saddens me. Once the jewel of all, Alexander's conquest, and the capital of Tamerlane's empire, she has fallen into disrepair and goes fallow with neglect. I must confess knowing this already, but forgive my sense of romanticism. I did want tea. Oh, see this place once. I have no work to do here. Once the junction of trade lanes between east and west. Samarkand has become isolated and useless to me, but the ghost of her history and past ing me strength and resolve the case that I carry. With me is heavy in my hand, it is my burden, but with each stop, that burden lessens. I have allowed myself this one folly, leaving the web for a moment, but I will not linger long. Munich, Germany, September 8 hours 5 minutes and 18 seconds a.m. The city still sleeps late into the morning on Saturday, and in many places the streets are still empty. There is a grand majesty of Munich's remaining pre-war buildings, and I remarked on its beauty to my local driver. It was a lot nicer before the British bombed us, he said without age. And of irony, he was at least 2 generations removed from the war, and did not seem or want to understand when I told him that London had the same problem. Most of humanity is horrified by the specter of the war, of what happened here. They wonder how man could be so inhumane. These people know nothing of the world or of nature, red in tooth and claw. These are the people that artificially elevate humanity, tie above the animal kingdom, people that maintain an ephemeral barrier between our particular primate subgrouping and the rest of life on earth. I never understood these people. I deposited one more device downtown in a massive state-of-the-art theater complex. I hid it carefully and set the little slaved atomic clock to my own. My flight departs in a few hours, and if you are following me, you will have no luck in Germany. London, England, October 5 hours 9 minutes and 19 seconds a.m. London shows her war wounds with flat gray office towers and plain, blocky apartments. Yet her age and history lead through the scars as I stroll down the Thames, scarcely aware of the brackish odor of the oily waters. The trash and detritus in the river don't sadden me the way I imagine it would Are you draw some artificial line between a hamburger wrapper and the fallen leaves of a tree that I will never understand. You distinguish between nature and humanity in a way that puzzles me. We are nature, our cities, our roads, and our orbital satellites are no different than a termite colony or a bird's nest, except perhaps in scale. There is nothing unique about humanity. I know that I am all but alone in this conceit. But history and nature herself will prove me right. The devices I planted here are in the underground, silently waiting for the day to come when I will activate them, and they will open their ceramic filters and gently release their payload into the air. I burned the last decade of my life like a candle that forged the perfect weapon, hardened against the air, hearty and undeniably alive, burning with the will to survive. I have chosen the stations because the first letters of each station spell my name. Consider it an artist's signature. I wouldn't tell you this if I wasn't sure this would be useless information, and I doubt you have even uncovered who I am. As always, I will be gone before you arrive. Chicago, Illinois, November 2 hours 15 minutes and 0 seconds, 3 p.m. Chicago is the hub of a great wheel of airline traffic along its 1,000 intersecting lines. Billions of passengers will pass through, robbing the stale airport air of oxygen and expunging carbon dioxide. Even these sterile atmosphere-regulated glass and steel tunnels, I still see nature, green and red with life. I need to make a distinction. I know that what I am doing seems to be wrong, evil. However, I also understand that morality is an artificial device we used to guide tribal behavior, a useful conceit in creating harmony and growth in small populations. But there is no real we, I to good and evil. Nature is beyond that. There is nothing evil about the wasp that implants her young into a living caterpillar. Our concepts of ethics are as fragile as our bodies, and used as impermanent. A few devices in the ventilation systems will infect millions. You can search for them if you want, but there's a great deal of redundancy in my plan. You can grind yourself to the bone attempting to undo my work, but in the end you will fail. If you are wise, you will cease pursuit and begin to prepare for the inevitable struggle ahead. Tokyo, Japan, November 9 hours 18 minutes and 5 seconds p.m. Tokyo must be a hell to those who see nature as only forest or mountains or clean ocean waters. To me, it is a wonder of that natural world. The lights and madness of Roppongi are just as wondrous and alive as the synchronized flashing of fireflies. This is nature, and, if you will allow me a moment of species self-congratulation, this is nature at its finest and most wonderful. But nature has no apex. It will only grow and learn and become more beautiful. It brings tears to my eyes. I was asleep for so many decades, laboring in a lab for a pharmaceutical giant. Which one is not Empo or Tat? It will not help you find me, especially not this. Late, I wish I could tell you that there was some epiphany, some concrete lesson I could share with you to make you understand why I have chosen this path for us all. The truth is sadly mundane. The influx of money from a chain of discoveries gave me the time to think and become aware of the world and its systems slowly and gradually. The money also gave me the resources to act once I was determined. The world regulates itself. People ascribe some sort of special malevolence to the acts of man, unaware that we are not the first species to war, to commit genocide. Foolish. This is not unique to man. Many other species before us outstripped their habitats and sowed the seeds of their own destruction. They simply are no longer among us to act as a warning. Evolutionary strategies either work, forever sustainable, or they do not, and the species die. This is the only rule in nature. Live for the future, or be buried in the past. It should be clear now to all of us that despite our species' meteoric growth, we have not opted for the former strategy, and it is only a matter of time before we collapse. I will not stand for that. I am as much a part of nature as anything else, and so are my weapons. I will be the regulator. We will adapt or die, but be brave, no matter the outcome. The world will be bettered, and I sincerely hope you will be there to see it, so that you can know that I was right. The devices here are spread randomly. One is buried in a planter box that struck my eye as I walked the streets, another beneath the table of bustling cafe. You must know now that finding them will be impossible. Please, for your own sake, the time for pursuit and prevention is long past. It's time to prepare. San Francisco, California, December 0 hours, 0 minutes, and 0 seconds a.m. I never imagined that I would remain uninfected, despite my precautions after so much exposure. I had elongated T virus's dormancy for just this reason, to buy myself a little more time. I have not finished my web yet, as I had originally envisioned it, but my infection models show I have done more than enough. I will rest a little now, and I will try not to regret my part in this. Not my actions, of course, but my inability to see the fruits of my labor. Humanity would have died without me. We've grown soft, slow, no longer a viable organism. We would have slowly, subtly altered the environment until the world itself was toxic to us, and then we would have vanished with a whimper. Those who think that man has the ability to destroy the world labor under the same strange anthropocentrism as those who think we are somehow divorced from the rest of the kingdom of life. We could no more end the world than we could create it. We only can kill ourselves and take a few million unstable species down with us. Is this how you want to end, slowly poisoned or drowned by our inability to see the long term? This is not the way, and I will not allow it. Humanity, I am giving you a great gift, though I know you will never see it as such. I am giving you competition. You will work together. You will merge your resources and be reforged and tempered in the fires of struggle and crisis together, or you will die. You will blossom into something new, or you will fertilize the fields of the next competitor for space and resources, but you will change. It's inevitable now, and it brings me pride and joy even as the lining of my lungs slough free and I drown in infected blood. I have left you something, one last breadcrumb woven into these letters. It may be the key to your salvation. If you find it, it will set you onto the path to the cure. You understand that I can not just hand it to you. That would defeat my whole purpose. Believe me when I say that I want you to live, but I must be strong not to undermine the grand struggle that will shape you for centuries to come. It's over now. If you still wish to seek me, you are only wasting your precious little time. Anything that could help you, I have already sent. The rest I have burned and erased. The triggers on the devices will release soon, very soon. But if for some foolish reason you want to see the meat and bones and fluids I will leave behind, you will know where to find me. I will be patient zero story for those eyes. There was this one time when I was younger, about 5 or 6 years old, when we had moved into a new house. It was just me and my mother most of the time, since my father worked long hours during the evening into the early morning. We had been in the house no longer than 2 or 3 weeks, and the school year was coming to a close. Only now had my parents explained to me what had happened in that house many years ago. The truth of what happened on that day did not set me free of my curiosity, but rather fueled a string of nightmares I can't seem to shake. Maybe sharing it with you will help. It was a warm summer evening early in the week when I got home from school. My parents trusted me to walk, as the neighborhood was a quiet area and the school was only a few blocks away. As usual, my dad was leaving for work as I got home, so we had our normal chit-chat about my day and if anything interesting had happened at school. Nothing had happened at school, at least that was worth noting to my dad, who seemed to be in a hurry. My mom was in the kitchen getting my plate ready for dinner. We ate early since my dad had to leave for work at such a strange time. but I had gotten used to it over the years. As we sat together, I ate dinner, while my mom watched one of her soap operas that I didn't necessarily hate, but didn't exactly love either. There were no other plans on the horizon, as all my friends, all 2 of them, were busy with their own This meant a lonely night of homework and video games, which wasn't necessarily a bad thing. I remember sitting beside my mom just after finishing my plate and looking up at her. She was engrossed in her show until she gave a sharp look toward the kitchen, her face curled up with confusion and curiosity. So she got up to walk toward the kitchen to investigate. The light from the kitchen spilled into the now dark living room, lit only by the sharp yellow light of the kitchen and the flicker of the television. I had seen what she saw as well, but to me it seemed like a slight disturbance in the light. After investigating the kitchen, she returned and shrugged it off as if it were nothing. To me, it was nothing. So we continued watching television until my mom asked me to go finish my homework. As I walked down the hallway toward the staircase up to my room, I could feel a cold chill in the doorway where my mom had gazed earlier. It gave me chills, but nothing like when I got to the bottom of the stairs. There was something about the stairs in this house that made me feel unsettled. The basement was fine. The basement stairs were fine. Hell, the crawl space in the basement had more life and character to it than the staircase that led to the upstairs. I absolutely despised having to climb up and down its dark wooden steps, especially late into the night. It wasn't that I was afraid of the dark or monsters or really anything of the sort. I can't really explain it. It felt like the stairs were watching me, so I would run up and down them as fast as humanly possible. You can. How that feeling you get when you're being chased, and it feels like whatever is chasing you could grab your ankles at any moment and tear you down. Yeah, that feeling. Once I got to my bedroom, I was safe, as if whatever dark entity that constantly chased me up the stairs was not allowed into my room. It was a safe haven from whatever lived in or on the staircase, which is why I spent most of my weeks in that house, in my room or out with my friends. I could remember my room was plastered with posters showing off my love of Star Wars, horror movies, and one of Simple Plan. It was a phase. Like most kids into Star Wars at my age, my floor was littered with nearly hundreds of action figures, play sets, and anything my parents could get their hands on. It was a mess, but it was my mess, and I loved it. Having completed my homework, which consisted of bland math and English papers, I rewarded myself with a solid 2 hours of video games. By the time I got sick of the games, I looked at the clock to see it was nearing 9 o'clock. As I stood up to turn the television off, I could hear a voice from downstairs. "Honey, can you come downstairs for a minute?" I pushed open my door and stepped into the hallway, but before I could even reach the top of the stairs, someone grabbed me tightly and pressed me up against the wall, which jarred me from my skin until I realized it was Why, Mother. She quickly put a finger over her mouth and had a look of distress. I kept my mouth shut after seeing the fear in my mother's eyes that I still to this day cannot shake. "Don T, go downstairs." I heard it, too, she said quietly, her voice shaking with terror. I could feel my body warm up as my heart rate increased. She quickly shuffled me back into my bedroom and quickly shut the door behind her. Pulling out her cell phone, she quickly, but clumsily, began dialing 911. her hands shaking as if she'd been outside on a cold winter night, as she began talking with the operator, begging for them to send somebody. I could do nothing but stare at the door and pray that it would not open. After another few moments, it spoke again. "Honey, please come downstairs," it said, louder and filled with frustration. I could tell my mom was trying her hardest not to cry, but her eyes could not lie. She walked over to me and knelt down beside me, holding on to my shoulders in order to comfort me, who was mostly confused. "It's going to be okay. We're going to be fine," she said, almost as if she was saying it to keep herself together after what felt like an eternity of waiting in absolute terror and speculation of who or what was downstairs. There came the quick pounds of feet on the stairs. We couldn't help but back up into the wall, and as my mother grabbed a trophy I'd gotten a few years ago from a baseball tournament, there was a loud bang on the door. "Hello, it's the police. Are you all right?" yelled a strong voice. "Oh, thank God, yes, we in here," she yelled in response. The door opened, and two police officers who seemed not only giant but angelic as they entered the room. My mother ran over to the first officer and hugged him as she began to cry. I began to cry as well, but only because my mother was crying. Being a young child, the only fear I knew in that moment was the fear my mother was giving off, and it was intense. One of the officers sat down with me until my father got home and tried to talk me out of my confused state of worrying and terror. When my dad got home, we all hugged for longer than I could remember ever hugging them. I didn't know what had happened or what was going to happen, but all I knew is that everything was going to be okay, and seeing my dad assured me of that. My father had a way about him that when he was around, everything was okay. Even if it wasn't, it was still like that to this day. The next morning, after having slept in my parents' room that night with a police car sitting outside of the house, my parents had the talk with me. They explained that we were going to be moving within less than a week and that I was going to stay with my grandparents until then. I asked what exactly had happened, and all they said was that there was something wrong with the house. It was a vague explanation, but when I got to my grandparents, they explained more bluntly that the house was haunted. That explained the feeling on the stairwell. That also led to my young imagination going out of control. If the house was haunted, and that thing watched me day in and day out climb those stairs, what had made it wait so long? Why had it waited until then? And even more frightening, why did it ask for me to go downstairs? I had nightmares for the next few years about the house, regardless of having moved far away from that part of town. I remember overhearing my parents during my phase with the nightmares about whether or not I should go speak to a therapist or some kind of expert that could help me. I was fine most of the time. Just whenever I went to sleep, the nightmares eventually went away. Years later, I still have the odd nightmare here and there, but nothing I can deal with. I am an adult after all. About a week ago, my parents decided to tell me the truth about what had happened in that house. As they began explaining it, I was horrified that for all these years I hadn't known the truth about what happened. Were they going to try and relieve the nightmares which had long passed? Or was there something more sinister to my experience? They explained that the house wasn't haunted at all, at least as far as they ever knew. A few days before that night, a woman had escaped from the mental ward of the local hospital. It wasn't like a huge institute on for mental illness, but a wing of the hospital that held about 12 people at a time. The limit was never met. The woman who escaped that night was named Iris McLeod, and she was being detained after supposedly killing her 3 children. She suffered from severe schizophrenia and had several manic episodes before being committed, but was never on any sort of medication. Those poor kids. The police had done a more thorough investigation and found that she had been living in our attic for the majority of the week after her escape. She lived right above my bedroom. That was by far the worst part of the whole thing. She never just pounced on us. She never wanted to escape. Those eyes I could feel on me every time I went up and down those stairs were not ghostly or my imagination run amok. Those eyes were real, and I had felt those eyes on me for years after. I can feel them on me now, but a part of me doesn't believe it. I don't want to believe it, but the fact is that she was never caught. Those eyes could very well be on me, but who knows, they could be on you too. Story 5. The French Traveler. The scene was the Savant Club in the last years of the 19th century. Why, despite the extreme lateness of the hour, a few of the regulars were gathered there for cards and conversation. The latter turned, as it often did, to the uncanny. "H.M.," said Nelson Hayes, one of the older members of the club, before retiring rather early thanks to an inheritance. He'd been employed at the British Museum. "I've heard a tale or two that'd chill the blood." Hazel Peyton, late of West End fame, smiled thinly. "Have you?" "Oh, yes, even yours," Hayes insisted, smiling back despite perhaps a hint of asperity in his tone. "Do tell," a new voice said from behind the old museum man. He started and then turned rather slowly. It was Miss Amelia Frost, the head of the inner circle. She nodded almost imperceptibly and gracefully took a seat that another one of the men at the table hastened to pull out for her. A round of heartfelt good evening and the like ensued. "Tut," Miss Frost said. Silence instantly. "Tell me a tale that will chill my blood, Mr. Hayes." "Ah, well, H.M. Ah, yes, I know just the thing," Hayes said with evident relief. "Yes, just the thing. This was told to me some years ago, not long after I left the museum," save Miss Frost, posed as always. Everyone at the table shifted and groaned. The story of Hayes' departure from the museum was so well known any of them could have told it. "But, of course, it's not that business I have to tell," Hayes was swift to assure them. "No, this involves a certain inn in Warwickshire. It doesn't stand any more, but it did, I believe, when I was told the story. The story itself took place in the -1 of George III, ****, in the days of George III, the Wood House. I was in inn along the road from Kenilworth to Solihull. Although well situated, it was not prosperous. Locals avoided it, and travelers generally found it expedient to press on to Temple Balsall or Balsall Common. Our protagonist is Sabine de Monnier. She was a young French woman of noble birth who had decided, somewhat hastily, to take advantage of the healthy clime of England instead of enduring the Jacobin storm battery. I la patrie. Will the moon. Here was going to Solihull, where she had friends, but the rotten weather obliged her to stop rather than continue to the former, or even Temple Balsall. The hitherto silent driver of her coach suggests, the Wood House. I lacking any knowledge of the district, and somewhat worse the wear for the sudden rain, Multimonier acquiesced. Thus she found herself in halting converse with the Yankee, a rather batrachian specimen. Neither spoke the king's English, as it was then, with great skill, but eventually came across that lodgings were available, perhaps not of the quality she was acquainted with, but respectable enough for a country inn. The proprietor promised after his fashion. "Oh, yes, Miss is in luck. There's a good room on the first staff. Lor, ain't a proper hall. No, but still the best you'll find." That's a fact. Moll had her doubts to the good innkeeper's honesty, but no doubts whatsoever that she had never stayed in such humble quarters, and whosoever shall exalt himself shall be abased. As Scripture says, the room itself was a bare one, with bed, dresser, and what you might call a desk if you were feeling generous, and a sea hair to go with it. It was hardly fitting for one of Moll's servants in the days, and she had any, let alone a woman of high birth, and possessed only two features of note. The first was a lengthy PH, raised rather minutely carved into the lintel of the door. Multimonier had to stand on tiptoes to read it, and even with the aid of the shabby oil lamp that she took from the pseudo-desk, it was rather inscrutable to her eye. But wild beasts all ret there, and their house all be filled with ferpents, and outrages all dwell there, and the hairy ones all dance there. The second was the painting. It was in the style of the latter half of the 17th century, and was a curious mixture of portrait and landscape. There was a woman in the foreground, dark all around, quite obviously some sort of Latin, although looking rather placid for that type. Behind her, forested hills, a dreary sort of river, a setting sun. Nothing of great interest, you might suppose. There was no signature, but a plate on the bottom of the frame read, "I portrait of an Italian." Moll made herself home as best she could. Once her belongings were all in place, she was ushered into a shabby sort of parlor. Supper, served by a near-silent woman, was nothing more than warm soup and some slices of cold meat, with a glass of vinegary wine to wash it down. All in all, it was at best hasty, barely adequate to Moll's needs. She was considerably homesick and quite abashed, and dearly wished for escape from this dreary fate. Returning to her room, the painting caught her eye. At first, it hadn't seemed very striking, but now Moll was somewhat entranced by the piece. There was something vivid, almost lifelike, in the Italian woman's eyes. Quite a fine bit of work for what had first seemed an uninspired daub, and, aided by the strong, steady rain, now to sleep, *****. It was the very stroke of 9 o'clock when Moll woke suddenly, courtesy of the sound of a sigh, or was it a sob? Naturally, our fair French woman looked around quite sharply, but there was no one to be seen. She'd sensibly locked the door when retiring for the night. Shabby as the room was, the door was sturdy. It would take prodigious strength to batter it down, and the windows were shut. It was unlikely they had been opened since the reign of George II, and doubtful anyone unequipped with a pry-bar could have done so now. No, Moll was quite secure. But wait. What was this? There was some curious magnifying or illuminating property to the moonlig. Apparently, because looking at the painting now, hitherto hidden details could be seen. Dark figures, 4 or perhaps 5, were now faintly visible behind the Italian woman. They were hard to make out in any detail, a great fault on the painter's part. Was he an amateur? Yes, quite likely. A country squire expressing talents he did not fully possess, no doubt, and as for the Italian, our expression was not placid so much as stoic or perhaps resigned. It never occurred to Mole that with the storm still raging, there could have been no moonlight whatsoever. She sat upright in bed for on time, staring at the painting before sleep claimed her again, but not for all that long. The clock struck 12 when Mole was once again roused. This time it was a cold puff against her neck. She slapped at her perfect throat, roused herself, and then looked around in confusion and no bit of fear. It had been as if someone had breathed on her. How could it be? There was certainly the feeling of some shadowy presence in the room. As hastily as she could, Mole lit the oil lamp alongside her bed, and was glad of the light cast upon the room through the glass, greasy and smudged though it was. Nothing. The windows were still shut, the door still locked. The room was, Muldemonier aside, empty of any Christian souls, or so it seemed at first glance. Her gaze was irresistibly drawn to that painting which loomed so large in her room and her imagination alike. There were more tricks of the moonlight, which was even brighter now, if focused rather tightly. Upon that old picture the dark figures loomed, somewhat larger and clearer now. They were more or less of human proportions, if rather muscular, but covered in thick, tangled fur. There was owls. Oh, some strangeness about their legs. They were altogether too thin for such robust bodies, for one thing, and for another there was something queer about the way they were bent. As for what still seemed the focal point of the painting, the Italian woman's resigned expression was not resigned at all, but clearly one of fright. Mole gazed upon the ever-velatory art for quite a while, fixated by it, before somehow again falling into slumber. A sigh or sob in the room, an exhalation upon a lovely neck, and now a touch, feathery and warm, upon the same. It was now 3 in the morning, as before, so now, after the usual bout of dizzying terror, and hastily confirming the room was empty, Mole of course looked to the painting. What was this? Could it be? It couldn't. But it was. The woman in black was moving within the bounds of the frame. Her hands were pressed against the canvas, as if seeking escape, and she uttered silent entreaties. A tear steamer eamed down her cheeks. Only a hard heart could have resisted such a silent entreaty, and Mole's was soft as butter. She rose, her shift no doubt gleaming in the light of the moon or what hour. 8 it was, and crossed the room, bare feet making but the faintest noises upon the floorboards. There could be no doubt. The Italian woman, weeping and moaning, had both palms pressed flat against the canvas, as it was a remarkable effect. Those pale hands seemed almost to pulse with the frantic force of her thumping heart. After a moment's hesitation on the precipice, as it were, Mole reached out to her imprisoned co-dweller. When her fingers passed through what should have been canvas, instead of pressing against said material, she gasped, and gasped again when the woman in black took hold of her wrists. Ah, mon Dieu, Mole cried out. The grip of the Italian woman, the Italian spectre, was cold and hard as iron. There was no escape, none whatsoever. Muldemonier was pulled headlong into that oh so curious painting. There was a moment of dizziness, threaded through with a mad laugh of relief and delivery, and then Mole found herself on dry earth, pebbly and rough against her soft solace. She'd been turned around 180 and was staring out at her dark, shabby room. All was nearly black as pitch. The moonlight, or whatever strange light it was, has gone. Naturally, she pounded against the canvas, but while it was as clear as glass, it was as hard as stone. There was no escape that way. Moldemonier screamed, and screamed again away, and hairy, tenebrous shapes clutched at her, took hold of her, and drew her back into the waiting darkness. But no sound was heard in the inn. In the morning, the innkeeper and his wife quietly disposed of most possessions. The driver's silence was, as usual, purchased with 2 guineas. The inn no longer stands, The inn no longer stands, and the painting, described as a portrait of a French woman, ended up, I believe, in the collection of the late Lord Atherstone. Miss Frost clapped, and so, of course, did all the others. Story 6. The painting. When I was 7 years old, my 10-year-old brother, Jamie, was kidnapped, or so they say. The police claimed whoever had taken him were professional in doing so, that I had been incredible. Why, lucky to have not been taken as well. They described the kidnapper in this way because no fingerprints were ever found on any of the furniture. My brother had never made a sound at the time, and importantly, there was no sign of a break-in at all. None of the windows had been broken. The doors weren't busted. Nothing. Several days before his disappearance, my father found a painting while rummaging around in the attic. He had been trying to find his old bass guitar after I had asked him if he played any instruments. Turns out he used to play in a band with some of his friends. Andy was a pretty decent player. His group was called Serrated Age, and fortunately after an hour of searching the guitar was never found, but the painting was. It had been placed against a wall and surrounded by boxes. My father had noticed the golden frame glinting as he walked around. The painting itself was magnificent when he lowered it down. It seemed to be in good condition despite being in the attic for so long. There was a house in the picture, a large gray house surrounded by grass. In the background a cliff could be seen, then a sudden drop which evened out to an ocean. It stretched on into the distance. Some birds could be seen up above circling the house. On the back were scrawled some words in red ink that read Gade ei ben ei hun. My mother recognized it as Welsh. We didn't know what it meant at the time. My brother and I weren't very ecstatic about having it as a new house decoration, but my father loved its simplicity. He decided to put it up our bedroom. That night we had dinner as usual. Spaghetti, I believe. Then my brother and I went upstairs for bed. We both shared the same room. We were slightly afraid of the dark, so our door was left ajar most days, letting some of the light seep in. After getting changed into our pajamas and joking around for a bit, we both settled down to sleep. It was around 2 a.m. when I awoke. I realized I was hot and sweaty, so pulled myself into a sitting position. Jamie was in his own bed to my left, sleeping soundly. My throat was parched, so I figured I'd get a drink of water. I pulled myself out of the bed sheets and left the room as quietly as possible, creaking the door open. Slowly I crept down the hall, conscious that the floorboards creaked. The last thing I wanted to do as wake everyone up. I headed into the bathroom. When I returned, I was refreshed and pulled myself back into bed. I had pretty much stood my head under the tap and lapped up water like a cat, cupping it in my hands and splashing my face as well. As I pulled myself back into bed, I noticed something odd about the painting on the wall. There seemed to be a black smudge to the right of the house, something I hadn't noticed earlier. Curiously, I pulled myself back to my feet and approached the painting, as I couldn't quite make it out properly in the dark. On closer inspection, I gathered that the smudge was some sort of man. It resembled a human, but was completely black. It looked like it was standing stationary, looking outwards. Its head was cocked ever so slightly to one side. I considered waking Jamie to show him the mysterious figure, but decided he'd be cranky if I did so. I'd wait until morning. I retreated to my bed. When morning arrived, the figure was gone. To my dismay, I told Jamie about the figure, but he didn't seem to believe me. For the rest of the day, I watched the painting suspiciously, believing that it may appear again at any moment. It didn't as my brother and I were climbing back into bed. That night, I had forgotten about the figure. That is, until the same thing happened again. Just as before, I awoke in the early hours of the morning, soaked in sweat. This time, I anticipated the figure's arrival and glanced at the painting straight away. I felt a twinge of fear. The smudge was there again, but it had moved, and it had doubled in size. It had adopted a new position, right in front of the house, a few meters away from the front door. Instead of going over for a closer inspection, I forced myself to go back to sleep, hoping with every fiber of my being that I was dreaming. That night I fell asleep shaking in fear. The next day was uneventful. I avoided the painting for the most part, spending time in living room downstairs watching TV. I mentioned about the dark figure to my parents that day, and of course they didn't believe me. "You were just dreaming, Harry, that's all," they told me. This was the last day I ever spent with my brother. That night I had awoken at a similar time again, around 2 a.m. I can't remember exactly what time, with dread and fear churning in my stomach. I reluctantly glanced at the painting. It was completely black. I remember physically shaking in terror, believing that if I made the slightest noise I would trigger something. Slowly I led myself out from under the bed sheets. I crept over to the bedroom door and then ran over to the bathroom, the floorboards creaking as I went. I locked myself inside. I figured I'd stay here until morning, then asked my father to put the painting back in the attic the next day. There was obviously something wrong with it. I just didn't know what. What happened next will stay with me for as long as I live. After several minutes of waiting in the bathroom, I heard the floorboards creak in the hall outside. At first I thought my brother had woken up, disturbed by my footsteps running down the hall. The creaking was approaching the bathroom and stopped just outside the door. "Jamie," I whispered. No response. I knew someone was standing right on the other side of the door. I just couldn't figure out what they were trying to do. "Did they need to use the bathroom, Mum?" I said. To this I heard a scratching sound on the other side of the door, as if someone was dragging their fingers across it. I backed away, terrified. After a moment, whoever it was walked away, their footsteps creaking their way towards my room. The next day I woke in the bathtub too. The sound of banging. It was my father. He was thumping the outside of the door with his fist. "Harry, Jamie, are you in there?" he snapped. I answered it slowly, stiff from lying in such an uncomfortable position. Apparently this morning when my parents had awoken they had found our room empty. My mum went downstairs to find us and my dad looked around upstairs. "Is your brother in there, he had asked when I opened the door. I shook my head, but he didn't believe me and pushed past, searching the room. It was only after another half hour of searching that my parents began to panic. The police were called around. Everyone was convinced someone had broken into the house and taken him in the night. The police believed I had locked myself in the bathroom to hide from the kidnapper. Out of fear, they questioned me relentlessly about whether I had seen his face. I couldn't answer. There was something else. On the outside of the bathroom and door there were 3 deep gouges, diagonal from top left to bottom right. The police believe they were caused by a knife, repeatedly dragged across the surface. They claim that the kidnapper had been trying to get me as well, but had thankfully given in. Our house was closed off for several days, and we were provided with a hotel. While the police searched for fingerprints or any signs of breaking and entering, as I said at the start, they found nothing. When we finally returned to our home, my parents were a teary mess. They moped around slowly, answering my questions with one-word answers. I knew anything I said about the painting at this point was useless. No one ever seems to listen to children in times of need. They continued to act like this for half a year. It was a horrible time. Returning to my bedroom after everything that had happened was horrible. I remember crying when I saw my brother's empty bed. His toys that were still scattered across the floor, toys he may never be able to play with again. Before I turned to leave the room, I glanced at the painting one final time and noticed something peculiar. There was no dark figure, but there was something strange in one of the house windows. Curiously, I approached and looked closer. It was a face, a little boy, and from what I could tell he looked the spitting image of my brother. His face was contorted into one of terror, and he had tears streaming down his face. His hands were both pressed up against the glass. Several months later, the police gave up on the search. His funeral was held on April the 12th. To this date, the saddest day of my life. After that, all we could do was get on with our lives. I showed my parents the painting, but they shot it at me and stashed it back in the attic. They thought the boy had been in the painting all along, that I was simply imagining the resemblance. I'm 38 years old now and have a place of my own. When I eventually left my old home, I made sure to take the painting with me, for I am the only one who truly knows what happened to my brother. The dark shape I saw all those years ago was some kind of entity, something evil that intended to trap us both in the painting for an eternity. It succeeded with my brother, but I had locked myself in the bathroom. So had been I keep the painting in the attic now, in case one day I might be able to free him. I can't lose hope, like my parents did. After researching, I found out that the words on the back of the painting, Gada Ben Han, had been a warning. It translates to English as leave alone. Sometimes in the dead of night, I'll hear a thumping sound coming from up there, footsteps roaming around in the attic. I'll always shout my brother's name and hope he may have finally been let out. I never get a response. Story 7. Seeing, really seeing. Sometimes you really can't understand what someone is going through. You have to go through the same, live through the same, face the same disasters and torments they have. I haven't seen her in a while. It's been almost 8 years, of course. I would have visited her sooner, but I have a job, a life I have to keep up with. I couldn't see her and risk all that I had worked for, all I held dear, fall apart. I knew what each visit brought. Another session of her thoughts, her inner turmoil, unleashed and stewing venom across every aspect of my being. I had enjoyed talking with her. Yes, but that was in the beginning, when she was in control, when she was still sane. Another visit would make her even worse. Last time she was already unhinged from reality, from herself. Her nightmares had taken over, and every time I went to see her, those same monsters threatened to consume me as well. Call it whatever you like, but I have to protect myself from hurt before it affects me even more. Last time I understood why they locked her away from the others, why she was no longer in touch with the world. God only knows what she's become after 8 years. I miss her, and I don't want to leave her as she was, all alone, with no one to be with. No one to keep her grounded and help her push back all the demons that she said had invaded her mind. She deserves better. She needs a proper goodbye at the very least, so instead of going to work, I make a right on Bradley Drive. I keep on going down the long road, lined with the forest, and make my way to the hill in the clearing where William's house stands, the institution. As I pull up to the front gates, I get a much better view of the building and see that it is in serious need of maintenance. I get out of my car and head towards the entrance, taking note of the weeds and vines consuming William's house. A painful creak of the rusting gates informs me that people are a rare visit to the institution nowadays. I glance at the front doors, and then I see the notice plastered across them. Do not enter by order of the state of Massachusetts. The Williams House, an institution for the mentally unstable, has been shut down until further notice due to the architectural faults and other general hazards. Trespassers will be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. September 28, 1960 to be. Holding Inspector Arnold Lewis Ramsey. Shut down. That means she's not here anymore, and I never got to give her a proper farewell. A minor setback for me, but I was nevertheless determined. I needed to see for myself that she was truly and forever gone. I headed towards the east wing of the building, where, somewhere among the bricks that made up William's house, was a door. Having reached the east wing, I began feeling my way around the ivy-ridden wall for the old brass doorknob that was my gateway inside. After what felt like hours of searching, my hand grazed metal, handy pulling back the ivy that crawled up the building, opened the door and stepped inside William's house. It was definitely abandoned, in need of a good dusting, roof repair, and some new wallpaper. As the current one was peeling, it reeked of old. The musky air threatened. It choked me, consume me, and trap me here for eternity. I was sure I was the only one to visit since the building inspector. I headed up the flight of stairs to the 5th floor for one last look at where she had dwelt. Each step made a creak that echoed through the wing as I crept up the stairs, and the early morning sun slowly transformed to afternoon daylight, sending streaks of light through the crumbling building. As I reached the 5th floor, The conversations of long past started seeping into my mind, and before long I was in front of her room, every word she had said to me flooding my brain. You know I'm stuck here forever. Don't feed me any THIS bullshit you call freedom. I just don't want to see you so confined. Well, I've got you. It makes staying here easier. I guess so. I'd probably love it if someone visited me in your posit. Yeah, it's real nice. But for me, it's more than a visit. You've helped me, too, see the better part of this. And when I can't find anything good about this place, you show me one I've overlooked. You help me out. You're always saying how there's nothing to see in this place. But have you looked outside lately? The flowers are just starting to pop out after the long winter. The birds are coming back. Even the trees have their own way of showing beauty. Okay, so spring is finally coming around, but spring comes every year. I come every week, and you still haven't gotten tired of me. That's true. I just wish I could actually go outside for once. Smell the flowers, not just see them from my window. Lie on the field, not just look at it. Go into the forest and actually touch the trees again and feel the earth and grass tickling my toes. I want to be in the forest, not just see the same part of it every day from this hellhole. You'll be there soon, and I'll be there with you. There you go, feeding me a fantasy again. I'm just tired of all of this, of the fact that I've been labeled as a freak, mentally unstable, as they like to call it. I am tired of being here, knowing that these are the only walls I'll see for the rest of my life. No one except you sees me anymore. I'm a lost cause. Even to my family, they don't even bother with me anymore. Because they know I'm going to rot in here. I'm never getting out, and you know it. Don't be like that. You've been controlling yourself for as long as I've known you, and I've known you for a long time. There have definitely been worse than you in this place. They'll let you out eventually, and stop it. Stop what? I'm only trying to. No, you're in. OT cheering me up at all? They're all lies. Every last one of them. And yet you keep telling me that I'll be out of here soon, that my family actually does care about me, that there's always some kind of bright side to things. You don't. No, you don't know anything. Not one. All I want to do is help. No, you don't know anything. Nothing about me. I'm stuck here forever. You don't know what it's like rotting, confined to these walls for the rest of my life. I just want to help. I know what it must be like. Nitrogen monoxide. You don't. Don't tell me that you understand. You can't possibly know what it feels like to be abandoned, left for dead. No one, not even your family, who's supposed to love you. No one giving a shit about you. Letting you rot, not one visit in 5 years. You won't understand, and you never will. You don't know what someone's been through until it happens to you. She was right. In the end, staring at the gray walls, scratched and tainted with spots of blood here and there. I will never know what it was like for her here. I can only imagine. I stood at the window, the field she saw every day, mocking me. Mocking her. This is exactly the kind of place that can find people to their insanity, with no way of overcoming it. These walls were the cradle of her nightmares, all that gray, all that dull, all that ominous nothing, everywhere she could never escape. Not then to reality. Even if she opened her eyes, she'd never wake up from the nightmares. These walls were what let the images roam free enveloping her more than ever in her mind. I sat on the floor, glaring at the walls. I breathed in and closed my eyes as I felt the simple gray color invade me, consume me, and I started to see them one by one. Like a ghastly procession, they took over the gray. I saw things that looked like death, others too grotesque to identify, and people. There were people everywhere, but they all hid behind masks with eyes as red as blood. Looking away, the more I tried to look away, the more I could feel their eyes drilling holes into me. Every inch of me. I shut my eyes, and it only got worse. I could hear the whispers of the night, but was it really night? The sun had abandoned me long ago. I lost track of time. Noises flooded into my mind, people murmuring in my ear in a language I couldn't recognize. I opened my eyes, wanting it to be over, wanting to get back to my car, wanting to get out of this hell. But I was trapped. I didn't see the door to the hallway anymore. There were too many of them. They were past the walls, filling every inch of the ceiling. I couldn't find a single spot of refuge in this room. I tried to back myself against the wall, curling up and screaming, wanting this too, and the murmuring in my ear grew to loud voices that bounced off the walls, and the red eyes closing in on me, wanting me, knowing that I was no match for them. I couldn't go on like this. I needed to get out. Then her voice started to seep into the mixture of murmurs and voices and satanic noises. She started to cry. She was crying everywhere in the room. The window long forgotten, blocked by all the nightmares. Now she was wailing. She was in pain, and for once I felt her pain, not having anyone to see, nothing but these demons in her life, nothing but pain and anguish in this room. She was screaming now, but as it went on, her screams went from desperation to terror and fear. I couldn't take any more. I started screaming, not knowing what to do, having no way of getting rid of these hellish creatures that surrounded me. I scratched at the walls, trying to make the nightmares go away, but they only snickered at me. I was a joke, a weak little life form that didn't know true fear and terror until now. Desperately, I clawed at my arms, my fingernails digging into my skin. I bit at my tongue until I tasted blood. I pulled and yanked at my hair. I pounded the floor, crying. I stood up and smacked the walls, slammed into them, tried to get out. She was right. This pain, this fear, this torment was unimaginable. There was no way out. No way I see how to escape this horrid place, this inferno. Her words came back to me as I sank to the floor, knowing that I'd never leave this place, that I would forever live in my nightmares. You won't understand, and you never will. You don't know what someone's been through until it happens to you.